The wind howled through the broken streets, carrying with it the scent of rot and decay. Crumbled buildings loomed like forgotten tombstones, their skeletal frames standing in defiance against the wind. In the distance, the faint glow of what remained of a city's lights flickered weakly, but it was more an illusion than anything of substance. The world had long since passed its prime, left to wither in silence. The only sounds were the gusts of wind, the faint creaks of collapsing structures, and the eerie whispers of the forgotten. Seraphina stood at the edge of a decimated street, her worn military jacket clinging to her frame, a silent testament to the battles fought and survived. The bloodstains on the fabric were her only reminder of how close she had come to death, again and again. Her eyes, haunted deep with something that refused to let go, surveyed the area around her. There was nothing. Nothing but ruin. It was all that remained of a once thriving metropolis. She stepped forward, boots crunching against the debris beneath her. Her fingers gripped the handle of a blood-stained knife, the only weapon she had left. She hadn't asked for this life. She hadn't asked to be a survivor, fighting in a world that had fallen apart. But there was no choice. No other way to live. Not anymore. The buildings around her were silent, too silent. It had been days since she'd last seen another human. Not that it mattered. She didn't trust the survivors anymore. Too many had turned on each other. Too many had become desperate. But desperation was a virus. It spread through the last remnants of humanity like wildfire. She wasn't here for the others. She wasn't even sure why she was here at all. But there was something drawing her to this part of the city. A feeling that gnawed at her, telling her that she needed to find something. Or someone. Seraphina stopped when she heard it, the faintest sound, a low rumble. Not the wind. No, this was different. Her hand tightened on the knife as her heart began to race. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the familiar echoes of the wind, nor was it a distant rumble of some collapsing structure. No, this was something far worse. Her instincts screamed at her to run. But she didn't. She hadn't run in years. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The sky above was shrouded in thick, unnatural fog that seemed to swallow every light, every trace of warmth. She couldn't see far, couldn't see past the immediate ruins. But she didn't need to see to know something was out there. Something, alive. A shadow passed over her, followed by another. It moved with a speed and fluidity that made her stomach drop. It was not human. She knew that much. Damn it! She muttered to herself, taking a cautious step back. Her breath quickened as the shadows grew closer. Then she heard a sound, a screeching, guttural noise, like nails dragging against stone. It echoed through the ruins, sending a chill down her spine. She didn't need to see it to know what was coming. She had faced creatures like these before, but that didn't make them any less terrifying. In the chaos of humanity's downfall, new horrors had risen, things that didn't belong. Things that weren't even of this world. They hunted in packs, moving like phantoms through the fog, preying on the weak and the lost. Seraphina's pulse pounded in her ears as she scanned the darkness, the faintest rustle of movement giving away the position of the first creature. She could just make out the shape, tall, emaciated, with limbs that seemed too long and too twisted. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, reflecting the dim light that filtered through the mist. It saw her. The creature snarled, its mouth opening wide to reveal rows of jagged, yellow teeth, glistening in the weak light. There was no hesitation. No mercy. Just instinct and hunger. Seraphina felt the familiar rush of adrenaline flood her system. She had no choice but to fight. There were no other options. Running wasn't an option, not anymore. The creature lunged, but Seraphina was faster. She sidestepped, spinning with the grace of someone who had fought more battles than she cared to remember. Her knife slashed across the creature's side, the blade cutting through its thin, leathery skin with a sickening sound. It hissed in pain but didn't slow down. Seraphina's heart hammered in her chest. She was running on pure instinct now, moving without thinking, her body reacting before her mind had a chance to catch up. She'd fought like this before, fought for her life, fought for a future that seemed as far away as the distant stars. But the future was a dream, a fading one at that. The present was all she had, and she would fight with everything in her until she drew her last breath. The creature staggered back, blood pouring from the gash, but it didn't retreat. It only seemed more enraged. It roared, louder this time, and Seraphina's grip on the knife tightened. She couldn't do this alone. Suddenly, another figure appeared, charging out of the mist, another creature, far larger and more dangerous than the first. Its hulking form blocked Seraphina's path, its eyes glowing brighter, its presence a force that seemed to warp the air around it. But then a voice. A deep, gravelly voice. "Get down!" Before she could react, a second figure, human this time, tackled her to the ground, just as the creature swung its massive claws through the air above her. She could feel the heat of the creature's presence, the stench of its decaying body, but she didn't have time to think. Her hand shot out, grabbing the human figure, pulling herself into a roll just as the creature's claws sliced through the air where her head had been moments ago. The man, she could barely make out his features in the fog, grunted, pushing her to her feet. "We need to move! Now!" Seraphina didn't hesitate. She nodded, gripping her knife tightly, the adrenaline still surging through her veins. They weren't out of danger yet. The man didn't say another word. They ran, side by side, their footsteps echoing through the ruined streets as the creature behind them howled in frustration. But as they turned the corner, Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning. There was something in the air, something dark, something that had been waiting for them. And now it was awake. The fog clung to everything. It wasn't just the air that felt thick, it was the weight of the world pressing down on them, pulling them further into the depths of something neither Seraphina nor her newfound ally could quite comprehend. The man had barely spoken since their narrow escape, but Seraphina didn't mind. She needed no words to understand what was happening. The creatures weren't the only threat anymore. There was something deeper, more insidious, lurking in the shadows of this shattered world. Her breath was ragged as they sprinted through the crumbling streets, their footsteps echoing off broken concrete and shattered glass. The city had once been alive, filled with the sounds of people, of cars, of hope. But now it was only the remnants of something long gone. The faintest hint of fire still flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow on the ruins around them. It didn't look like fire should. It was wrong. Even the flames seemed corrupted, twisted by whatever had overtaken the world. "You said your name was Dorian, right?" Seraphina broke the silence, her voice hoarse. She had to know who this man was. Dorian didn't look at her, his eyes scanning the area around them with the practiced vigilance of someone who had seen too much. "Yeah. And you're Seraphina. Don't worry about names. Focus on moving." Seraphina clenched her jaw. He wasn't wrong. There was no time for pleasantries. They had to get out of the open before the creatures found them again. The alleyway they were running through was narrowing, forcing them closer together. The world felt like it was closing in on them, like every turn was another trap. "Where are we going?" Seraphina asked, still unsure of what Dorian's plan was. If he had one. Dorian's footsteps slowed as he reached a rusted metal door, hidden behind the twisted remains of a once vibrant store. He glanced over his shoulder, his face grim, before giving a short nod toward the door. "In there. It's a safe house. I think." Seraphina didn't hesitate. She moved toward the door, her knife still gripped tightly in her hand. She didn't care if it was a trap. She needed somewhere to breathe, somewhere to think. The weight of the world, her world, had been too much to carry on her own. If this man could offer even the smallest sliver of hope, she'd take it. The door creaked as Dorian pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside was stale, thick with dust. The space was small, claustrophobic, with old furniture strewn about, some covered in rotting cloths, others broken beyond repair. There were no windows, only a flickering light overhead that did little to brighten the room. It felt like a place frozen in time, a place where nothing had changed for decades, a place untouched by the world outside. Seraphina stepped inside, glancing around with suspicion. She didn't trust anyone. She couldn't afford to. "What is this place?" she asked quietly, her gaze never leaving Dorian. He slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a metal bolt that sounded far too loud in the silence. "It's an old shelter. One of the last ones still standing. At least, that's what I heard. It's safe for now." Safe. The word made Serafina scoff bitterly under her breath. Safety was a myth now. There was no such thing as safe in a world like this. But she was too tired to argue. Her muscles burned from the exertion of running, her body still on edge from the encounter with the creatures. She needed to rest. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of safety. Dorian moved across the room, pulling a chair out from beneath a collapsed table. He dropped into it, his face still obscured by a helmet, but the tension in his shoulders was palpable. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low. Serafina nodded, her hand instinctively brushing the scar across her cheek. "Yeah. I've fought them. These things. The monsters. The creatures." Her words hung in the air, tasting like ash in her mouth. "What the hell are they? Where did they come from?" Dorian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the cracked concrete floor, lost in thought. "They're not from here," he finally said. "They were here before. They've always been here. But no one knew. Not until it was too late." Serafina frowned. "What do you mean, they've always been here? I thought they were part of the fallout. Part of whatever happened to the world." "They are," Dorian replied, his voice colder now, more distant. "But they're also something else. Something older. You're not the first person to ask about them, but you're the first person who's made it this far." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "There's more to this world than you realize. More than just these creatures, more than just the collapse of civilization. There's something else. Something watching." Serafina felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. "Watching us? You mean them?" She couldn't help but feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, like the room itself was closing in. "No." Dorian shook his head, his voice suddenly softer, almost reverent. "Asterisk it, asterisk." Serafina opened her mouth to ask what he meant, but before she could get another word out, a low rumble shook the walls of the room. She froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creatures outside. It was something else. Something deep beneath the ground. Something alive. The rumble grew louder, stronger. The walls trembled again. And then, the lights went out. The darkness enveloped them, and in that suffocating silence, the ground beneath them seemed to shift. The floor groaned, the very bones of the shelter complaining as if it, too, were alive. Serafina's heart pounded. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. She didn't need to ask to know it was something far worse than what they had already encountered. Dorian's eyes widened as he stood up, his hand reaching for a weapon at his side. "It's coming! They've found us!" The ground trembled beneath them once more, sending shivers up Serafina's spine. The darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating, as if the very air had thickened with dread. In that pitch-black space, the only sound was the frantic beating of her heart, and the subtle scraping of Dorian's boots as he moved toward the wall. He seemed just as tense as she was, his every movement calculated, precise. "What's happening?" Serafina's voice trembled slightly, a rare crack in her usual composure. She could feel her palms beginning to sweat, her fingers twitching against the cold steel of her knife. She tried to shake the panic that was rising in her chest, but the rumbling, deep and unsettling, only grew louder. "They've found us," Dorian repeated in a hoarse whisper, his voice low but filled with urgency. "It's not just the creatures. Something else is waking." A screeching sound, high-pitched and unnatural, pierced the silence. It made Serafina's blood run cold. It wasn't the guttural roar of the monsters, not the creatures that stalked the streets like predators. This was something else entirely, sharp, screeching, like metal scraping against glass. A scream that seemed to reverberate through the very core of the shelter. Her breath caught in her throat. "What is that?" she whispered, too terrified to speak any louder. The noise felt like it was coming from within the walls themselves, like the building was alive and screaming for them to leave. Dorian gritted his teeth, his eyes narrowing in the darkness. "It's here. It's real." Serafina could hear the tremor in his voice, despite his best efforts to maintain his composure. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another fight for survival. It was something that threatened the very foundation of reality itself. Something ancient, terrifying, and incomprehensible. The rumbling intensified, and Serafina felt her feet shake beneath her, as though the entire earth were preparing to swallow them whole. The floor buckled underfoot, a loud crack echoing in the stillness. She stumbled, barely catching herself against the cold concrete wall. The lights flickered overhead and then went completely dark. For a moment, the world was nothing but black and the muffled sound of her rapid breaths. Serafina's heart thudded in her chest, panic creeping in, but she quickly forced herself to breathe evenly. Don't lose control. That's how you die in a place like this. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Then came the unmistakable sound of something scraping against metal, followed by a soft, almost imperceptible hiss, a sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Before she could react, the air shifted. The temperature dropped several degrees in a matter of seconds. It was like a cold breath had swept through the room, wrapping around her skin like ice. Serafina's instincts screamed at her to run, to get away from whatever it was that had found them. But her legs felt frozen, rooted to the spot. Dorian, his silhouette barely visible in the pitch-black darkness, reached out toward her. His voice was a whisper now, urgent and tight. "We don't have much time. Stay close. Do not let go of me." Serafina nodded, her hand reaching out for him, though she couldn't see anything. The shelter around them felt too big, too alive, and yet suffocatingly close. The air was thick with a scent that didn't belong, something rotten, foul, like decaying flesh mixed with an acrid, metallic tang that burned in the back of her throat. The sound of something large shifting, scraping against the walls, filled the room, and Serafina felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. Something was here. Something had found them. "Is this it?" Serafina's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. Her mind was running wild with possibilities, but none of them were good. The creatures, the monsters, they were bad enough. But this? Whatever it wasn't natural. Dorian didn't answer at first. Instead, he moved toward a broken shelf along the wall, fumbling in the dark. She could hear him muttering to himself, his breath quickening. Whatever he was doing, he wasn't doing it fast enough. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, a piercing screech echoed from the other side of the room, followed by a loud crash. The ground shook again, this time harder, sending debris falling from the ceiling. The floor beneath Serafina's feet buckled as the wall to her left cracked open, revealing an unnatural, greenish glow from within. She could feel it in her bones, the pull of something ancient, something dangerous. "Serafina, move!" Dorian shouted, his voice frantic now. "Get to the back of the shelter, now!" Her heart pounding, Serafina turned and bolted, running through the darkness, her feet barely touching the floor as she sprinted toward the back of the shelter. She could hear Dorian's footsteps behind her, feel the rush of air as he followed. The sound of scraping and rumbling was now deafening, the walls shaking with an intensity that made it impossible to stay on her feet. She reached the far corner of the room, slamming her back into the cold concrete wall. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, but there was nothing to see, nothing but shadows moving just out of reach. And then she heard it. The growl. It was low at first, like the rumble of a distant thunderstorm, but then it grew louder, closer, until it was right in front of her. She didn't dare to breathe. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the knife in front of her, ready for whatever was coming. Dorian had been right. Whatever had found them was not of this world. It wasn't just a creature. It wasn't just something to fight. It was the end. In that moment, the lights flickered back on, just for a second. A flash of illumination, enough to see the outline of the creature as it surged forward, massive and grotesque, with eyes that glowed with a sickly green light. And just as quickly as it appeared, the lights cut out again, plunging them back into darkness. This was it. The end. The darkness seemed to swallow Seraphina whole, and for a fleeting moment, she believed she might never see the light again. Her senses, already on high alert, screamed at her to move, to fight, to run, to do anything, but the cold grip of fear paralyzed her. The air was thick with something ancient, something foul, and the ground trembled under the weight of the unknown threat that loomed ahead. Then came the unmistakable sound of shifting, slow, deliberate movements as if the creature had already anticipated every step she might take. It was close now. The green glow from its eyes illuminated the space around them like the last dying embers of a fire, casting long, grotesque shadows across the crumbling walls. The growl grew louder, more insistent, reverberating deep in her chest. It was coming for them. Seraphina's breathing was shallow, her heart thundering in her ears as the knife gripped tightly in her hand. She could feel her pulse in every part of her body, each beat louder than the last, urging her to act. But the creature wasn't just a monster. It was something else, something more powerful, something older. It wasn't just hunting them. It was feeding. Then, a voice, Dorian's voice, cut through the chaos, steady but tinged with something Seraphina hadn't heard before. Fear. Seraphina, stay back. I'll hold it off. Get to the exit. The words hit her like a physical blow. Exit? There was no way out. She didn't even have time to respond. Before she could make sense of what was happening, the beast lunged from the shadows. Its form was too large, too unnatural, its jaws snapping with a sickening crack. It was faster than anything Seraphina had ever encountered, its long limbs reaching for her, its claws ripping through the air with terrifying precision. Instinct took over. Seraphina dove to the side, rolling across the cold floor, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike. The ground beneath her buckled again, and she pushed herself back to her feet, adrenaline surging through her veins. But the creature was relentless, undeterred by the slight misstep. It pursued her with a single-minded focus, its glowing eyes fixed on her, its breath hot and fetid in the darkened room. Dorian, still behind her, hurled something, she didn't know what, toward the creature. There was a bright flash of light, blinding in the darkness, and a thunderous crack as the creature reeled back, screeching in pain. For a moment, Seraphina thought they might have won. The creature stumbled, and she saw the faintest flicker of hope. But hope was a fleeting thing. The beast, now enraged, snapped its massive jaws and turned on Dorian, who had made the fatal mistake of stepping too close. The momentary advantage vanished, and before Seraphina could react, Dorian was thrown against the wall with bone-crushing force. "Dorian!" she screamed, her voice hoarse with panic. He didn't answer. Blood poured from a gash across his forehead, his body crumpled in an unnatural way against the shattered stone. She could see it, his lifeless eyes staring back at her, the flickering light in them extinguished. A fury unlike anything she had ever felt surged through Seraphina. For the first time in months, the gnawing weight of her guilt, her grief, her constant struggle for survival, all of it shattered. This was it. They would die here. All of them. If she didn't fight back. The creature, now focused entirely on her, advanced with terrifying speed. Its breath was foul, filling the air with the stench of death. Seraphina's hand tightened around her knife. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The creature was too powerful, too relentless. But she wasn't about to let it take her without a fight. In a moment of clarity she remembered something, the explosives. Dorian had been carrying a pack of old-world explosives, scavenged from an abandoned military cache. They were her only chance. Seraphina turned and sprinted toward the table, her eyes locked on Dorian's pack, her heart racing. She grabbed it, fumbling with the clasps as the sound of the creature's growls grew louder behind her. She could feel its presence getting closer, could sense the heat of its breath against her skin. Time was running out. Her hands were shaking, her fingers slick with sweat as she pulled the detonator from the pack. Her thoughts were scattered, her breath ragged, but she didn't stop. The creature roared, its massive form closing in as she clicked the button. Nothing. Her heart stopped. The creature lunged. But as it did, a deep, resonant boom shook the entire shelter. The world seemed to fold in on itself as the explosion tore through the room, a blinding flash of light engulfing everything in its path. Seraphina was thrown to the ground, her body slamming into the concrete as the shockwave ripped through the room. The deafening roar of the creature was drowned out by the sound of the explosion, and she felt the floor beneath her crack, as if the very foundation of the shelter was crumbling. For a moment, everything was still. Then, through the smoke and dust, Seraphina slowly lifted her head. She could taste the blood in her mouth. Her vision swam, the edges blurry. Her limbs ached. The world spun in and out of focus, and she struggled to push herself to her feet. But there was nothing left. The creature was gone. The blast had consumed it. And for the first time in a long time, Seraphina allowed herself to believe she had won. She collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her hands, still shaking, touched her face. The scar, the memories, the pain, it was all there, always would be. But the battle was over. For now. And then she heard it. A faint scraping sound, distant but growing louder. The walls shifted again. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. The shelter wasn't safe. She hadn't defeated the true enemy. She had only won a single battle in a war that had no end. But one thing was certain, she would fight until the last breath, because humanity wasn't done yet. And neither was she. The final battle had only just begun.